item 14, natural environment targeted rate. Gail, I think yourself and the team, are they going to come through to support you?
Yes, they are.
So it's been moved and seconded, and I just opened it up for discussion. So, Gail, I'll leave it to you, and thank you for your patience. But it was important for us in the last agenda item that the music industry people sort of did that item before yours. So thank you to you both, and I'll let you introduce the team.
Thank you. Ko Ranganui, ki ronga, tēnā koe. Ko Papatua nuku, e tokoto nei, tēnā koe. Kina rangatira, o te komiti, e hui hui nei. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you. Well, I think most people know I'm Gail Ogilvie, the General Manager of Environmental Services, and will also know Phil Brown on my left here, who manages our biosecurity area and has come to join us to provide any more detailed information on kauri dieback. And also, you may not have met Renier Dutoit, who is our financial guy, who can provide us with more information on the dollars if that's needed. So this is actually a milestone event today for us. This is the first of 40 reports that we'll be preparing on the implementation of programs that are funded by the targeted rate. So that's 4 reports per year over a 10-year period. So it's really the start of a journey that was triggered by a decision that was made around this table at the end of June to go ahead with that larger option B investment to try and improve the health of Auckland's natural environment. And I thought that this figure depicts really what's at stake and what we want to avoid. So the programs funded by the Natural Environment Targeted Rate cover 3 key outcome areas to do with controlling our pest plants and animal species across the whole region. So that includes our mainland, our harbours, the Hauraki Gulf Islands and our high priority freshwater lakes. Secondly, to reduce the risk of plant pathogens and in particular kauri dieback. And thirdly, and really importantly, to support the growing action that's being led from the community groups, schools and households across Auckland. Now, you've got a quite detailed report in front of you on progress to date. I'm really pleased. Our objective was to hit the ground running with this investment, and I think as evidenced by some of those projects that are outlined in the report, and also the maps that accompany the report that provide a visual depiction of the work we're doing. We've been able to really get some traction in the initial stages of this funding. And I really wanted on that front to acknowledge the staff. You know, it's quite a step up to go from business as usual and ramp up on delivery across a very broad suite of programs. So there's a huge amount of people involved. And the other hallmark of this work, which I'm really pleased with, is it's not just environmental services delivery, it's very much environmental services working across with community services, our parks, colleagues, community facilities, and also colleagues in REMU to deliver the programs. So this just gives you an overview of the breakdown of the spend. Essentially, largely just to point out that although there are a suite of programs being funded, the bulk of the investment sits in 3 key areas, and that's our work on plant pathogens, in particular kauri, the work protecting our parks, and the work supporting community actions. And there are smaller but obviously really important programs across the range of the islands, the region-wide work, freshwater marine biosecurity, and also importantly that enabling tools work, which is providing things like the spatial database that we need to show progress in these areas. Just a very quick deeper dive into a few of the key programs, kauri dieback, Before the targeted rate decision was made, we were in a situation where we had a very big stretch on our resources, primarily focused in what we were doing in the Waitakere Ranges and to a lesser extent the Hanua. We've been able to accelerate that track upgrade work in the Waitakere Ranges, but we've also, and I think this is important, we've been able to take a more region-wide view. So that's work with our local boards that have healthy stands of kauri and in some cases infected stands of kauri. We've got approximately 4,000 local parks across Auckland, and of those around 400 have kauri stands. So we're, as the first cabs off the rank, working with Kaipātiki, Waiheke and also the Waitakere Ranges local board to determine what work is required to prevent the spread of the disease in those areas. And then underpinning that work is important work around raising awareness so that Aucklanders know how that they can support and reduce the spread of kauri, and also working with the private sector, in particular nurseries. And I think we've touched on earlier with the presentation from the Waitakere Local Board the important work that's required in terms of controlling and enforcing the closure of some of those tracks. So that's a pretty broadly based program around kauri. The second program I just want to touch on briefly was working with communities to protect our parks. We're in a position before the targeted rate was approved where we had not only pretty rife weed infestations throughout our parks, but also quite a large reputation risk for council, and that we were asking community groups, a member of the public, to do significant weed control on the properties that they were working on, but weren't walking the talk on our own estate. So this is a big program of work to lift our game across our own regional and local parks and support the community groups that are also working in those areas. And then finally, the third program around the marine environment. One of the projects that's listed in your reports as one of the quick wins over the last 3 months was the launch of the Tukurawa or Waiheke project. So that's quite an ambitious piece of work to eradicate rats and stoats from Waiheke in the next 7 years. We're supporting some of that island pest eradication work with work on marine biosecurity. I think this is going to be really timely in Auckland, leading up to the America's Cup, and making sure that we take that opportunity to showcase what Auckland has on the Hauraki Gulf and work on some of our marine, very invasive marine pests as well, like, for example, the Mediterranean fanworm. In terms of next steps, we will be coming to you, as I said, every quarter with updates on the spend. We've also, over the last few months, been around to talk with all the local boards and provide them a bit of an overview with the proposed spend, and also some information on how we're viewing regional priorities and offering them an opportunity to send us through any projects that they might have in their local board area that meet with those regional priorities. So those regional priorities are things like high biodiversity area, gap in an important corridor, existing community action, and multiple outcomes from the spend. So we will be back in front of you in 3 months' time and happy to answer any questions.
Gentlemen, all done?
Thank
Okay,
you.
Councillor Walker.
Sure, got a few questions, and one is a question that I also put to Healthy Waters, and it just goes to issues around compliance and monitoring. The observation that I've made, and I think fellow councillors on the regulatory committee, is there's woefully insufficient budget in that particular area. And the consequence is that there are environmental misdemeanours happening all across the region because we're not onto it. We don't have sufficient budget that can go to sediment control, can go to removal of scheduled trees, a whole range of things. So I just put to you whether there's some capacity within this budget to support issues around compliance and monitoring. So that's one thing that I'd put up.
So thank you, Councillor Walker. From a Auckland natural environment broad perspective, it's a really good point. We were very careful when we were communicating leading up to the decision what the scope of the spend was. And I don't know if you remember or not, but what we were describing was the investment in pest, animal and pest weed control and the ecological restoration work that we can do being in scope. What was out of scope was any effects on the environment that were a result of our statutory processes, and also the other thing that was out of scope, which is an important area of work that I know we're working on across the council, is the relationship between our urban development and potential impacts on the environment. So those two are obviously linked, but we were really careful when we put this suite of programs forward about what the activity was going to be and what the results were going to be. And there's really not the space to stretch that at this stage to cover what would be significant additional work with respect to not only the types of conditions that are put on consents, but the way we go about enforcing those.
Well, I understand your response. I think what I would be communicating is that as far as the public are concerned, they're seeing a natural environment targeted rate. They're going to be making the assumption that we're going to be improving things across the board. And what I am suggesting is that there needs to be a joined up approach across council. So as much and all as we've got some budget in this area, there are other areas, for example, the loss of trees across the urban landscape, which is phenomenal. There was a protest by Forest and Bird on, what was it, can't remember if it was Saturday or Sunday. We've got massive Pohutukawa trees that are being felled quite legally. And this is happening, and people are seeing it. The other issue that I just bring to your attention that goes to biodiversity is an explosion of some pest plants, particularly gorse, tobacco weed, that I see on the northern motorway. It's just out of hand. And that might not be in scope, but as far as the general public are concerned, they would expect it to be in scope because it's what they see. So I just invite your comment on some of those things.
The work on the road corridor, either our road corridor or the national road corridors, are not in scope. To provide some reassuring comment though, we are working closely with those entities because depending on the end finishing point for the Regional Pest Management Plan, which is going through this committee in the next 6 months, the current provisions are for the work that I described we're doing on our own park estate, but also a statutory buffer area of 500 metres around all of those areas that we're working. So that will actually create a legal obligation for any landowners, including central government agencies operating roads and our own roads, of course, plus private landowners, to reach a certain level of weed control in those buffer areas. So that will assist. It won't completely solve the problem, but it will assist. And that broader problem, we are working with those other entities to make sure that they lift their game similar to the way we're doing it.
Through you, Mr. Chair,
Yep.
the problem that I'm describing is one where there are substantial areas of land that are being held for speculatory reasons. So the land's not being actively managed from a farming or a husbandry perspective. There's vast areas of it now around the periphery of Auckland just being given over to gorse and various weeds. And the concern that I experience is I see a hillside, and a few years ago there was one gorse plant. Now the whole area is covered in gorse, and it's migrating onto Auckland Transport land, reserve land that's in the vicinity. It's literally out of hand. And that is what is happening around Auckland that people are seeing. It's on private land, and we appear to have abrogated our responsibility, requiring landowners to manage these plants, which we can require them to do. But there's a resource attached to that, and we don't appear to be applying that resource. So my question is, are we going to be able to beef up through this rate some of that work?
We're certainly able through this rate to provide information to private landowners on how to protect high-value ecological areas within their land. The question of what we control legally or not is probably something that needs to be discussed as we work through the Regional Pest Management Plan. But just for now, to help with your question, every proposed control in the Regional Pest Management Plan has been through quite a rigorous cost-benefit evaluation. And I know one of the challenges with controlling species by species by species is that it's huge cost to serve. I mean, under the current provisions, what's happening is we've got large numbers of staff going out to address neighbour concerns as to what particular species are taking over the neighbour's property, and asking them to eliminate that. And there's, I think, 1 or 2 or 3 strikes, and then after that third strike, we go in and remove the weed and then charge the landowner. But the problem with that work is huge cost to serve, and secondly, the neighbour 3 or 4 blocks down might not be doing it, so the area is reinfested. So that's why with the Regional Pest Management Plan, which we've discussed with this group, we're taking a site-led approach and looking at areas where we can upgrade weed control rather than species by species by species, because you just don't get the return. I mean, one of the challenges, and this applies to your earlier question, Wayne, with this area is it's a how long is a piece of string. I mean, we're focusing this investment in areas that meet those regionally significant criteria I talked about, and we just can't spread it too thin.
So one of the key things, if it's out of scope, it's out of scope as far as I'm concerned. And don't forget, we ended up going out to our communities in regards to all of the targeted rates and saying, this is what we will spend that targeted rate money on. So, you know, if it's out of scope, it's out of scope, and we just can't do anything about that. Councillor Sayers and then Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Gail and team. So, look, I just want to pick up on something kind of specific. In your presentation, you talked about the volunteers, the Kari dieback, and some reputational risk there. I don't know if you're aware, Gail, today one of your staff have sent me through an email saying they're going to give me more of a brief about what's happening in Rodney specifically, yes, which I'm really looking forward to and appreciate. Thank you. I think that's coming through your team, Phil. Because I really want to champion that in the area, and I've put my hand up to do that. If you could look at something for me today, specifically around your presentation, that's that one of the groups up there that you'll be giving me a bit more brief on have run out of disinfectant for a park that has Kari trees in it. I'm just wondering if you could come back to me later offline and just give me an update of, because they've approached council saying it's with the contractor and the contractor hasn't delivered it. So if we could have a look at that. Do you know which park I'm talking about? Yeah, if you could give me an update today, I'd greatly appreciate it.
We'll do that. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Sayers. We'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
That's right. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, well done. I suppose my question is around, you know, I understand what you're reporting about, and you're coming up for the second round in February next year. My question is around, this is the extra stuff that we couldn't have done without the targeted rate. Mm-hmm. And I understand that. But of course there are many, well there are certainly some parts of Auckland that are paying significantly, because it's based on capital value, towards this and are getting theoretically very little benefit. So we knew that because we knew what, as you quite rightly said a few minutes ago. So I think what needs to happen is this needs to be fitted in context to the other work that we are doing as well. Because it may be that the targeted rate goes full tit over here on these things, but actually our normal work program, noting that this is extra that's come in, will actually be able to help your area in here. And actually that money isn't compromised by being drawn away and put over here, which has ended up by being a priority. So I think, you know, I'm very conscious that February next year is February next year, you know, like next year. So let's get the messaging right, both politically and, you know, I'm asking a political question, I suppose, but in essence it's more than that. It's actually about getting the facts right. Yep. And I don't think we see that in the context of just randomly taking the first report. And I suppose my question is to you, Mr. Chair, and to the chair of this committee, Penny, is to look at that in the reporting. You know, it's very easy just to pull it apart and not see it in the big picture. Just reminding us all that the key to this was to bring extra work forward so that we could keep doing the normal things and actually invest more money in the things that were really urgent. And I just don't see how what we're presented with at the moment shows that picture. Well, I'm not seeing it anyway. So it's a challenge perhaps to you and your colleague to actually look at the reporting on the targeted rate stuff and then the work program, maybe one after the other, as far as agenda items, so that you can actually see the whole work program.
I think the challenge is going to be for all of us, ultimately, and that is not only with the targeted rate and where the money is going to be applied, but also with the business as usual. That's going to be incumbent on all of us. But again, when we went out for consultation, they also mentioned around the statutory requirements for us, and it was us to fulfil as a result of the targeted rate, the statutory requirements as well. So, you know, I mean, February, and the best thing is it's been taken on board, because I see Phil's writing everything you've just said, and he's writing it down vigorously. So I think looking forward ahead to February, even though bearing in mind December and January for us is a break, but I know that it's not for the staff. So look, February, I think hopefully something come back around what you've just said.
I mean, I say the same really to Healthy Waters. I mean, it really applies to that as well. It's the how we frame the messaging back, telling Auckland what we've done with the extra money in context of everything else that's happening as well.
And through the chair, if I could just 100% endorse that comment, because I completely agree, Councillor Simpson. I think that is really important. We need to, it's an overall delivery, but when it came up this morning with Healthy Waters, the solution, obviously, as you've described it, is to describe the overall delivery, but compartmentalise that into the extra with the targeted rate. But it's not only doing that in the sense of what we're delivering, but I think the attribution points you've made are really important as well. It's around this table that the decision was made to invest in that money, and I think the attribution needs to follow that as well. So we'll sort that out for the next report.
And it may be equitative, just to follow on, it may be equitative that the work program actually in areas that hasn't got the extra investment is actually higher on business as usual. You know what I mean? So it's about making sure
balancing it.
Cool. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Good to see you guys. You've identified the risks as the capacity within the unit, and one of your greatest opportunities opposite that risk is the public out there and the volunteers. So how are you upskilling your unit to maximise the potential of those literally thousands of volunteers out there who just want to help?
So really important part of the program. That's essentially council getting out of the way and supporting community action, because we've seen such a significant increase in that community activity. Our estimate is that about a year ago, when we did the invitations for the first ever inaugural festival, we had about 500 community groups. We've now got upwards of 1,500 community groups in Auckland doing conservation work. So really important that we get out of the way and support that work. And we're supporting it already, but we're able to upscale that with the targeted rate. Things like funding, additional funding, particularly for the week in, week out operational work that's needed. The feedback we get from those community groups is it's okay to get funding if you've got a project with a beginning, middle and end, but it's very difficult to get ongoing operational funding. So additional support for that operational funding, technical advice, materials, governance and health and safety support, but also beyond those areas that we can support them directly, providing opportunities for better networking so they're more joined up, and also profiling success. We had a couple of weeks ago the inaugural Mayoral Conservation Awards, and that was behind the rationale, obviously, behind that was to celebrate success with those community groups. So really important area in here, and one of the ones that's, you know, top priority.
So are those groups being advocated via the local board to your teams, or the teams know them all?
Yeah, we've actually now for the first time got maps of all of the local board areas and the community groups that are operating in each of those local board areas.
Excellent.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
So item 16, I'll move item 16.
Second.
And second, councillor Simpson. No questions, no comments. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. I then move the exclusion of the public, and it's all up there somewhere for the reasons why we're excluding the public. In 5 seconds. 4, 3,